Hey everybody, my name is Tim Smith, and today we're going to talk about what's new in Chef 12.1 through 12.19, which is our final Chef release. I'm a community engineer at Chef, and this is a presentation that kind of came together out of our community summit in London. Tom May and I gave a presentation very similar to this. It was everything that had happened in the last year in Chef and all the cool new stuff you might not know. And some people had asked us to give this as a full presentation, so I beefed it up with a little bit more information and gone all the way back to Chef 12.1 to give you a little bit of a history lesson and some of the things you might be missing. So we're going to bang through a whole bunch of Chef development and then hit on just some of the cool things that you might not have seen in the change logs and the release notes. So first off, Chef 12 shipped on December 4th of 2014. It's been a while. If you're still not on Chef 12, you should get on it because we're about to release 13. So you want to be within one, right? And since Chef 12.0 has been released, we've done 19 different Chef client releases. That's 23 Ojai releases as part of that. And then when we look at all of our core code, Chef client, Ojai, and some of the Mixlib libraries that we use, we have 5,800 different commits that have been a part of that. So we've got a huge amount of change that's happened here. Just a huge amount of change, in the last 6 months or a year. We've introduced a pile of new Chef resources. This list here. Cool stuff for dealing with packages, a whole bunch of great stuff for people who are on Windows and macOS, and then a bunch of cool stuff for dealing with repositories. And we'll go into some of these a little bit later. And on the Ojai side, because this data is pretty important, this is what allows you to make those decisions within Chef. We've introduced a ton of new plugins. We've got a whole bunch of plugins for dealing with some of the cool data that Systemd gives you. We support a bunch of new languages. An entire new file system plugin. If you haven't seen File System 2, that's a really cool one to check out. We have new information on hypervisor hosts, and then we have support for DigitalOcean and SoftLayer clouds, which is pretty cool if you use those. So let's jump into some of the new stuff here. I'm going to start off with Ojai because this is near and dear to me, and also, this is giving us all that information that Chef consumes, so it's pretty important that we gather as much as we can possibly grab. So we have additional first-class platform support. We've seen massive improvements on AIX, Solaris, and macOS information gathering. This is just a whole bunch of little improvements and then some really major refactorings that we've done that really brings these platforms up to the same level that we had with Linux and Windows and allows you to write a cookbook that touches all these different platforms and has the same level of information gathering. So that's pretty cool. The second one is death to hint files. If you've ever bootstrapped a node outside of a nice EC2 kind of utility, you'll realize that without the hints.json file telling the system that you're on Azure or EC2, Ojai wouldn't always do the right thing. It wouldn't always detect that you were on that cloud, so you wouldn't get the right IP information, and you wouldn't get all the cool metadata to tell you maybe what region you're in or what AZ you're in. That's not the case anymore. We've done a whole bunch of stuff to make sure that we're detecting your platform correctly. We're detecting your cloud platform, and we'll just detect it and we'll go grab the metadata as necessary. So that's a pretty cool one if anybody is taking a bootstrapping process through like auto-scaling groups or something. We're also detecting more platforms. I've got a big list here. There's some cool networking platforms in here, and there's OpenSUSE, which is a big one, the new OpenSUSE release, Alpine Linux, Raspbian for anybody with their Pis, and then Dragonfly BSD. And then we've also done massive improvements to how we detect virtualization. So this is kind of similar to the improvements I was saying before about first-class platforms. Really just kind of went through these things and did a whole bunch of small improvements over time and made sure that, no matter what the hypervisor that you're the host of or the guest on, that you're going to be detecting that correctly. So you can make decisions on whether you want to have things that operate differently, maybe if they're on a VM versus a hardware system. So that's Ojai. Let's go on to Chef, because that's what we're actually gathering this data for. And I'm going to talk quite a bit, actually, about custom resources. These were introduced in Chef 12.5, and as a person who writes a lot of cookbooks, I think they're really one of the coolest features that we introduced in Chef 12. And if we could do it over again, 12.5 would have been the 13. So custom resources are reusable Chef resources that you define within your cookbook. And they make it easy for you to automate repetitive tasks within your organization's cookbooks. And they really build on all the foundations that we had with lightweight resource providers. Some people refer to them as heavyweight resource providers, depending on how you define them. But we give you a powerful level of functionality now, and we give you a much, much simpler DSL. And because of that, I'm really just going to call these LWRPs 2.0. Having an entirely different name sometimes makes people think that there's going to be a long migration. There's going to be a lot of work involved. But I've gone through and converted tons of these within Chef's own cookbooks, and it's really been a breeze, and it's been quite fun to just delete a ton of code and simplify things. So here's a high level of some of the improvements. The first one is that everything is defined in a single file. In the old LWRP land, we had a resources file, and we had a providers file. And that made it really a pain when you were editing, you were creating these things, because you had to have both of those files open so you could reference back and forth. Now we're defining everything in a single file. It makes it much easier, especially when you're writing simple custom resources, to just kind of see everything you want to do in that single file. We also have a greatly simplified DSL. A lot of the boilerplate, a lot of things that should have just been the default that had kind of been bolted on over the years have just gone away. We do the right thing for you, and we make it much simpler to define them. We give you a new DSL for supporting multiple platforms and platform versions. That's something you don't have to use, but if you're making complex custom resources that need to operate differently on different platforms, you can write these really cool platform-specific providers, and you can do some very neat stuff with platform detection. We have lots of new helpers if you're writing pure Ruby resources. For a lot of people, your custom resource is really just a collection of a bunch of Chef resources, a file, a directory, whatnot. But for other people, you might want to write a custom resource that interacts with an API. It has to manage its own state. It has to determine if something needs to be changed, if something has changed. And in the past, that was kind of a difficult thing to do. So we've given you a ton of helpers, and we've really improved how that works within custom resources. Just make it so that you can very easily declare the state of the previous one, update if you need to, and make sure that Chef will notify that you have done the update. And really just in general, like, they just work. And I'm going to show an example here of why I love to write them, why I love to convert them. And that's this simplified DSL in action file here. So this is a simple LWRP on the left and then the conversion on the right. It's called MyApp. It just takes two different attributes, a name and an app name. And it really just creates a template. It's creating a web config and then trying to restart Apache 2. So in the previous one, we had to define our actions, set our default action. We had to have these two different attributes that we really cared about. And then we had to put use inline resources and yrun supported. For most people, they probably weren't entirely sure what those were doing, but they saw it in some example somewhere. They copied it, they pasted it, and it was there. It's really kind of in just about every LWRP that people have written. And then we actually get to the kind of the meat of what we're doing, which is this create action. And in the create action, we're templating out a config file. We're giving it a simple variable that's the app name that we passed in. And then we're restarting this Apache 2 service. Now, this is a little weird. We have to define this Apache 2 service below, but we give it an action of nothing. And the reason we do that is because this LWRP cannot see out of the LWRP into the greater cookbook where there was an actual Apache 2 service defined, somewhere where you would set action of enable or start or something. So we have to include this Apache 2 service in every instance of this LWRP so that that notifies when the restart works. Now we contrast that on the resource to the right. This is MyApp again, same functionality, it's just sitting in a single file. We don't have to define the actions because they're below. Why would we define them? We don't have to tell you what the default action is because it's the first one. In this case, it's the only one. Use unknown resources is just assumed. yrun is just assumed. If we didn't want yrun, we could turn it off, but it's just assumed that it's on. And then within the create action, we see that all we have is the template. And the reason for that is because we can actually notify outside of this custom resource. We can do probably what most people would expect to happen, which is just lay down a config file and then restart to the Apache 2 wherever it is. So that's custom resources. That's a simple example using built-in Chef resources. That's not using complex custom Ruby or anything like that, not diving into any of the crazy DSL stuff you can do. That is all in this video that I've created, or at least a little bit of it is in that video. And if you're interested, you can watch that. That kind of goes over some of the cool stuff that you get versus LWRPs. So our next item is cookbook gem dependencies. This is always a fun one. You need to use a gem somewhere. Maybe you have an LWRP or a custom resource, or maybe you just need the gem installed within Chef, but you need to get it onto the system. And how do you do that? So previously, what you'd probably do is something like this. So this is a Docker gem that we need for whatever reason. And we have a recipe. We have a default recipe within this cookbook. And in that, we say chef gem Docker. We want to run it at compile time so it gets done really quickly. And then in the library, we can actually require it. And because we don't know that the person put their recipe in there, we actually have to put it in a rescue block. So we're going to require it, and then we're going to fail with some nice warning if the person didn't do it. And this is a little weird. Not really what people would expect. And we want to get away from, especially when we're writing more library cookbooks, resource-based cookbooks, whatever you want to call them. We want to get away from the world of where we have to include a default recipe first. So now you can just put in your metadata gem of Docker, and then right in that library where you'd use it, you can just say require Docker. And as soon as that compile phase runs, the Docker gem will get installed, and when you use that custom resource, it'll just be there. So that's pretty cool. That just makes this whole experience work a lot better. Then we have Chef Solo. There's a ton of Solo users out there. If you're not one, you might think like, why would somebody ever use Solo? If you are one, you're like, why would somebody not use Solo? It's super awesome. But the problem was that Chef Solo used to use different technology. It had different code paths. It had a lot of quirks. We've kind of unified that all here. In Chef 12.11 and up, we use Chef Client Local Mode, which was an option previously, as Chef Solo, which gives you all the features that you would normally have, like search and all that stuff. So you don't have to write cookbooks that are very defensive. You don't have to do that like if Solo checks or any of that stuff anymore. As a cookbook writer and as a Solo user, you get a whole bunch of cool new functionalities. So this is a really cool one for a lot of people. Then we have editing and deleting resources. So we talk a lot about kind of the resource-driven cookbook world and wrapper cookbooks and how you consume the work that other people give you, kind of thinking of other work, community cookbooks maybe, or cookbooks your organization writes that you're consuming as like libraries. But what do you do if that person puts something in their cookbook that just absolutely conflicts with either what you need or what you've written in your cookbook? So sometimes you need to be able to edit that or delete that, but you don't want to fork it. And maybe the person doesn't want to take your change, or they're not keen to really merge it very quickly. So previously we had this Chef Rewind extension, and that would allow you to kind of edit these things on the fly. We've built that functionality into Chef now. If you have 12.10 or later, you can do these cool things with deletes and edits. So this is how you did a delete previously. If you had this user Postgres that you wanted to get rid of, you would make sure you had the gem, you would require the gem, and then you would unwind that resource. And again, that kind of goes into all the issues we talked about before, having a gem and all the gem dependencies and whatnot. So now you can just say delete resource. You just give it that is the type of user and its name is Postgres, and it will delete that resource out, and you'll be good to go. And what if you want to edit it though? What if it was just something wrong on that user? So previously, again, you could rewind it, and you could edit it. You would just find that resource by its type and name, and then you would specify the thing that you wanted to change. Now you can do that same thing. You just do it with edit resource again. You just change this home directory. So that makes it a lot easier to consume cookbooks that maybe have like one or two little quirks that don't work for you. The second thing, kind of going on to that with cookbooks that might not work for you, a lot of people kind of always complained about this idea of having the Yum and the apt cookbook on their run lists. We had a lot of cookbooks that looked like this, but luckily we've built that all in, and this is no more. So if you're running on your Ubuntu system, you don't have to worry about having Yum on your run list. If you're on your RHEL system, you don't have to worry about apt. And if you're running either of those, you just don't have to worry about this extra dependency and depth solving and all the stuff that goes along with that. So previously, you would have to do this include recipe default with the apt cookbook, and this got you an apt update and some other apt setup and stuff like that. In 12.7, we built that in. We gave you a new resource called apt update. You can name it whatever you want. I'll just say update please here. You can set it to be a periodic update, but by default, it does it right now. So this is pretty cool. You stick this in the very first thing on your base kind of recipe or roll or whatever you want that does that, and you get apt update running without having to bring in another cookbook for that. In 12.9 and 12.14, we gave you the apt repository and the Yum repository. These are the same resources you had previously in the apt cookbook and the Yum cookbook. They're just built in. So again, you don't have to bring that extra dependency in. You don't have to worry about like version conflicts or anything like that. They're just built into Chef now where you probably would want them in the first place. Then we have multi-package. This is another just kind of cool little time saver. A lot of what people do is obviously installing packages on systems. So previously you would write these things where you're iterating over packages. you would say, HTTP Jenkins tmux, and then you do an each and, blah, blah, blah package, and it would install. That was a little weird for people who are just kind of coming to Chef. The very first thing you have to do is dive into some Ruby. If not, they have to just include like 50 package resources in this enormous recipe, and somebody's like, that's not what you want to do. So now you can just pass an array to package, and this works on most major package providers. There's a few it hasn't quite made its way to yet, but this allows you to just very simply define a single resource. Shows up one time in your run list, one time in resource collection. But the cool thing is it's also much faster. There's some of the package providers that are a little bit slower to gather that data to go through and figure out whether we need to do an update or whatnot. This is a very quick way to do that, especially if you're on like a Yum or DNF package provider-based system. This is much, much faster if you need to stick a whole bunch of these together. So if you're a macOS user, we've got a ton of cool improvements for you. Like I said before, we've got a whole slew of new OHI work. So if you're on a Mac system, you get all kinds of cool hardware data, new file system data, new networking data, but also you get some cool new resources. We give you LaunchD, which allows you to kind of like effectively run services, and we give you OS X Profile, which allows you to do some cool stuff with settings and whatnot. So 12.8 and 12.7, cool new macOS functionality that'll allow you to manage your, iOS build farms or your Mac laptops or whatever. And on the Windows side, the first thing we're giving people is a whole bunch of new built-in resources. We had a ton of resources previously that were in the Windows Cookbook. That was something that any Windows Cookbook would basically have to depend on the Windows Cookbook itself, because it wanted reboot or batch or registry package, whatever. These things are all built in now. So basic Windows package installation, rebooting, registry manipulation, PowerShelling, all that fun stuff. That's all built into the Chef client itself. So you can start to see that Windows dependency go away. And then we've given you some new resources. We've given you Chocolatey package, Cab package, PowerShell package, and MSU package. And those are releases that those came in. So this is going to give you the ability, on the Chocolatey side, to get all kinds of cool open source products. And then some of these other ones are going to allow you to do cool stuff like Windows updates, which are pretty handy. If you want to start managing that with Chef, you can totally do it now. And again, like I was saying, this allows you to start removing that Windows dependency. There may be other things you're using it for, because it still does include a whole bunch of really cool providers, but a bunch of that need is built into Chef now. We have a few other cool Windows goodies here. I was going through the release notes and trying to think of things that I would have liked in my Windows Cookbook days. We have support for Windows Nano now. We have alternative user support. This is saying like, I want to execute something and I want to run it as user tsmith, and here's tsmith's password because it's Windows. I need a password to do that. So you can do that now. Package accepts remote files. That's super cool if you want to like install something off a SIPS share. We also have 64-bit Windows support, and that does all the fun little stuff about knowing where all the directories are and some of the magic that Microsoft does with 64-bit versus 32-bit. We've seen some significant performance improvements. That's a cool one for anybody doing this. Ruby has seen some cool performance improvements, and as we move some of those resources I was talking about previously into Core Chef, we went through some rewrites and definitely did some really neat stuff to speed them up. And then we've just got a whole bunch of improvements and fixes that are related to Windows paths. Previously in Chef world, this was kind of a tricky one because there's so many assumptions about like where a path is and what a path looks like, which way slashes are facing and whatnot. Tons and tons of fixes on that. So if you're a Windows user, Chef is pretty cool now. It was pretty cool before, but it's got some definite cool improvements. So then we got before notifications. Totally not a platform thing, not Windows, not macOS. This is kind of a cool scenario that you might have, or maybe now you're thinking of ways you could use this. You had delayed an immediate notification before. You would notify from a service to maybe do a restart. But what if you want to do something that requires you to do something before that? And the example that I was given, because my example wasn't good enough apparently, was that you'd probably want to use this to do an upgrade. So if I want to do this upgrade and just assume for a second that this execute here is properly wrapped in idempotency and whatnot, so it doesn't run every time. We have this upgrade that needs to happen, but before we do that, we have to shut down the application because it's one of those wonderful offline upgrades that has to do some database migration or something. So before we run this code, we can tell it to notify a stop to the service of third-party app, and it will just magically happen. It'll go find that within the resource collection, and it will stop it. So that's a pretty cool one. I haven't seen a ton of uses for that yet within the community side, but I imagine for this exact scenario, this will be a pretty cool one when you're writing cookbooks internally. Then we have system to unit, and this is a hard one to talk about. This came with 12.11. It's hard to talk about because there's just so many actions. Like this has 14 different actions because systemd does everything. So we support all the cool stuff that systemd unit files can do, and there's a ton of stuff that you can do with systemd unit files. So if you're on, Ubuntu 16.04 or RHEL 7 or whatever, you should definitely check this out. Check out some of the cool stuff you can do with systemd unit files now. And then my last one here, saving the best for last here, is enterprisey stuff. So we've got FIPS support in 12.8. If you're a government user, you definitely know what FIPS is. If you support government users, you know what FIPS is. We support it now. And then another one that I've dealt with previously, so I saw this, I was like, I gotta mention it, is proxy support. If you're that enterprise user who can't get out to the internet from your workstation where you're interacting with Chef, or from the Chef server, you can't get out to the internet, you'll know that like proxies are hard and they're difficult and they're defined in a bunch of different ways. We've done a ton of different work on these to just make proxies work. So those are two great little additions if you are in a secure enterprise environment. And my last thing really is that Chef 13 is coming out in April. So I hope everybody's ready. And I hope that maybe in another year when Chef 14 comes out, that I can come back and I can talk about all the cool stuff that we released from 13.1 on. I hope this is useful. If you enjoyed it, definitely let me know. If not, that would also be cool. You could let me know about that. But take it easy.